Since almost a year, I'm seeing a psychologist after my teachers and mom told me it might help me for personal issues. And since around a month or two, that psychologist proposed to me that I talk about things I like. Since I talked to her about Genshin a few times, she asked me who my favorite characters were, to explain their lore and what I like about them in the most detailed way possible. The first character I talked about with her was the Wanderer, with no hesitation. He was my first big heartstroke in Genshin, but I also told her I had a few others, and yet it still isn't very clear to me. I know I like a bunch of other characters, but it's difficult for me to really rank them, except for a few ones. I'm gaining time by talking about Raiden and next Nahida, who aren't as big of heartstrokes or favorite characters as the Wanderer to me, though I still like them. The thing is, there is another character recently who captured my heart ever since his splash art drop, and that is Lyney. Lyney, sweet Lyney, the first Fontaine 5-star character to be playable. As a friend, I was quite excited. A smooth-tongued Viking of Riz, the charismatic and flamboyant magician of Fontaine, who has a cat girl as a twin sister, the latter seeming to be a bit more popular in the fandom, a young lad who steals many hearts in game and who certainly stole mine. And yet I don't know why. Like, he's cute, there's a bit of nostalgia I probably had subconsciously and that I can't unsee after Ashikai once said he reminded her of Cat Noir from MLB. And I loved this character as a little girl, so of course I'm going to love Lyney. He has quite a sad background that I already suspected upon reading his first descriptions about some people of Fontaine suspecting he once lived in poverty, and also when you're part of the Fatui, well, you really have a very healthy past. It was easy for me to have empathy for him. I definitely want to give both him and Lynette a hug, and freminet at the same time. But I hesitated to talk about him to my psychologist, because next to characters like the Wanderer, Raiden A, Nahida, perhaps Farina too, well, at first sight, he feels a bit small. Not that he's badly written or anything, I know that, I love him, so I'd be the first one to say his character is good. But at first sight, comparing a human-ish oceanid mixed with cat blood or something next to a literal god and no divine product, can you understand my dilemma here? But I know I love him. I know he's not a bland character, I know that he's well written, the question is, to what extent? And this is why across a few months, I thought about it, wrote down many things, and finally had an illumination a few days ago. Why don't I break him down and analyze his psychology? I recently saw a bunch of videos of psychiatrists, was a psychologist breaking down and analyzing Oshinoko's episodes, opening, ending, and characters, and other animes as well. And it's fascinating. If you watched or read the series, you should definitely check out. Though his videos are quite long, about 3 hours each, so you can take your time and take breaks during your watch, but it's really worth it. And so, even though I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable as him in psychology, I still tried to analyze his character and highlight a few things that some people may not know or have realized when playing the game. Even I found out a few things while breaking him down, so I thought maybe I could make you learn some things too. I first posted this as a blog on Amino in the Genshin community, but I thought I could just make it a video as well. I'll leave the link in the description though, for those who would prefer to read it instead of listening to me talking for 20 minutes straight. Also, small disclaimer, but as you may have guessed, I'm not American and nor is English my first language. So if you don't understand bits and parts of what I'm saying, or if you hear me make some mistakes in words, pronunciations, or other things, feel free to correct me in the comments. The more you learn, the better. In this video, I'm going to analyze Lyney's mentality in a somewhat chronological manner, starting from his first years as a child to fast forward to today, and see when, why, and how his traumas impacted him. So without any further ado, let's take a deep dive into the character of Lyney.
All of us house members here, Lady Arlecchino herself included, are from Fontaine. We won't give up on defending our homeland. To us orphans, the only connection we have left to this world, apart from our family, is our homeland.
Born in Fontaine, Lyney feels very tight and close to his country. Yet he and Lynette don't seem to have that same connection towards their parents. Freminet, for example, another orphan in the House of the Hearth, still remembers and has clear distinct feelings towards his parents. Love for his mother and resentment towards his biological father. But Lyney and Lynette don't tell us anything about their progenitors, except for the fact they've passed away.
Back when our parents first died, Lynette and I were left wandering the streets.
They probably don't remember much of them. This may mean they were too young to remember them, which would be why Lynette would not be able to answer upon hearing the children in the orphanage be so weirded out at the sight of her cat features. But this sounds a little off to me. Considering people usually have their first memories from when they are 3 to 4 years old, that would make them 2 or 3 when they were out in the streets, which seems way too young for them considering how they acted later on. So I thought of another better fitting explanation. According to Wikipedia, adults who experience traumatic or abusive early childhoods report a longer period of childhood amnesia, ending around 5 to 7 years old. Their first memories would therefore be that of their trauma, and everything that happened past their parents' death. So I'm guessing they would be around 5 to 6 when they lost them. According to Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, he would therefore be ranked in the ages 5 to 13, the ages of industry versus inferiority, basically about competency. Did I do good? How can I be good? Although it's said that they were mainly to get food and by extension money, his little magic shows as a kid probably had another purpose. It's the foundations of Lyney's trauma, his crave for praise. Not having parental figures by his side to give him the love and attention he needs as a child, he tries getting that praise from his spectators in the streets. Magic, after all, has been his benefactor. Not only has it allowed him and his sister to survive, but it has also allowed them to gain the acknowledgement that most children growing up in a loving home would have received from their parents. Maslow's hierarchy of needs may be useful for us to analyze as well. If we look at it step by step, we start off by the physiological needs that aren't even met. Barely any food or water, no shelter, probably used in low-quality clothes. We can also guess they both had a bad quality sleep because of eventual nightmares, the danger, and the lack of overall comfort. Their safety and security isn't met either. They probably fell sick easily due to lack of protection and had no access to medication or even school, no adult to protect them, no too few belongings. Love and belonging either. No friends, no family, no bond to anyone beside their twin, or very superficially so to their audience, etc., etc. The very first step of the pyramid is not met and fulfilled. This facilitates the setting up for a traumatic experience, hence why he still remembers it very clearly and talks about this experience in the streets with us multiple times. It's been very impactful for him. I don't think his love and belonging needs are met. Even though Lyney and Lynette had each other, they still lacked that parental love that is essential for their development. They lack guidance, friends, real intimacy with people other than themselves. And even though Lyney's trying to replace that by his audience cheers and applauds, it's not the same thing. Blind love for some street rats does not equal the unconditional love of a mother or a father. And even then...
To my surprise, we proved to be pretty popular, and we could at least stop worrying about where our next meal would come from for a time. But I didn't want my sister to remain a street rat together with me forever.
Lacking real love and encouragement from his parents, Lyney had already a very low self-esteem and sense of self-worth at a young age. He says he was surprised that they got popular. He probably wasn't very confident in his abilities to begin with, didn't think he had that much talent. He also admits he didn't want his sister to stay a street rat alongside him. There's a difference between how you view others and how you view yourself, even when you're both living the same thing. His sister deserved better, but he wasn't so sure for himself. I'm guessing it's been at least several months or a year since they were in the streets. Now their physiological needs are met, as well as safety and security, but there still lacks any love and sense of belonging.
But I gradually discovered that while we were called foster children, he was really after my talent for magic trick. He would constantly take me to all sorts of banquets to garner attention, which he would then use to expand his social circles.
The nobleman only used them as tools, and I can guess there was severe child neglect in the emotional terms in their relationship. Neglect is a lack of attention from the people surrounding a child, and the non-provision of the relevant and adequate necessities for the child's survival, which would resume to a lack of attention, love, and nurturing. Emotional neglect is also characterized by a lack of nurturance, encouragement, and support. The nobleman only used them to get attention, entertainment, new contacts, and eventually money during his banquets and other events. I doubt he ever really cared much about them, aside from giving them the minimum to be in good health physically. He probably didn't speak to them that much, was pretty distant and too laid back and uncaring from his way of speaking.
The answer he gave me was, "She caught the eye of the most eminent person at the banquet, so I sent her over as a gift. I mean, you'll be able to perform your magic regardless of who your assistant is, yes?"
Here are some symptoms of emotional neglect I can find in Lyney. 1. Emotionally neglected children are frequently reported to have disorganized attachments and a need to control their environment. The need to control his environment, he wants to be the leader. I noticed that he heavily insists, even in the English dub, on the fact that Lynette is his little sister. Though it might be a cultural difference, though the game is Chinese, I know very little about this language and I'm going to base myself on what I know of Japanese instead, as Hoyo seems very invested in this dub as well throughout their game. As I know in Japanese dub, he calls her imoto, which is a common word to say little sister, even when you're twins. But comparing him and Lynette to other twins in the game, there is a difference. Ether and Lumine, it's implied thanks to, at least I don't know for the Korean dub, the Chinese and Japanese dub that Ether is the older twin since he calls Lumine his imoto in Japanese, and that she can refer to him as her ani or oni-chan in Japanese, or gaga in Chinese. However, Lumine doesn't always call him big brother, as is common in those countries for little siblings to do so. Instead, she switches between that appellation to his name depending on her mood and the emotional setting of the scene. It's as if sometimes she likes to think they're on the same level and wants to lift herself up, and yet sometimes in moments of vulnerability, she will refer to him as her older brother. In English dub, this is completely lost though, as both call each other by their names and never refers to one as being older or younger than the other. It's always my brother or my sister. In one of their voice lines, the traveler also says that them and their sibling are the same age, and that they even had to play rock, paper, scissors to decide who was going to do certain tasks, instead of saying it was always going to be Lumine because she's a little younger. Makoto and A. According to the book Treasured Tales of the Chokenshin Kageuchi, Makoto was the older twin, and perhaps it's because they are of the same gender, which might cause a difference, but although A refers to Makoto as her ane in Japanese, older sister, she always directly calls her by her name, and never by onesan or with other honorifics or forms. In English dub, A never refers to Makoto as her older twin sister, just as her sister, and still calls her by her name. Finally, Lyney and Lynette. As heavily repeated multiple times by the former, he is the older twin. Lynette does call him Oni-chan or Gaga, but can also call him by his name as well. Depends, kind of like Lumine actually. In fact, she seems more mature than him in a sense, and his overly fixation on the status of being older seems rather childish. The main difference compared to the two other pair of twins is that the fact that Lyney is older is not only explicit in Chinese and Japanese, because the English dub of Lyney also insists very heavily on the fact that he's older, compared to Lumine and A, who are always referred to by my sister or my twin sister, by either. Makoto, yes, also. And once again, in English, Lynette, as opposed to the other pair of twins, is the one who doesn't say anything, like Makoto and Ether, the actual older twins. Meanwhile, Lyney acts like the youngest out of the two, always proclaiming how he is the one who should protect his beloved little sister, younger sister, that he's the older brother, not twin, not brother, older brother, because that implies there is a severe age gap between the two, even if that's just by minutes or something. And as Lynette says,
seems Lyney is saying some strange things again. It's really worrying.
and if it was only with Lynette, but according to Freminet and how he acted in Act 3 and 4 of Fontaine's Art Conquest, he acts like an older sibling to most people, actually. Even the Traveler and probably other people much older than him.
Lyney is our team leader, and acts like everyone's older brother. But I can tell that he puts on a brave face sometimes. I tried to talk to him about it once. Told him that he doesn't need to wear a mask all the time. But he denied it, and we ended up having an argument. Since then, I've never brought it up with him again.
And Freminet confirms it that this is a lie. He's forcing himself to wear this mask of over self-confidence. This is just him wanting to have control over his surroundings, making sure no one leaves. Here's a small comparison to Tanjiro Kamado from Demon Slayer. Tanjiro acts like an older brother or paternal figure to his siblings, as he is the actual eldest of the family, his first sibling, Nezuko, being 1 year younger, and that this responsibility fell on him quite young after the loss of his father when he was at least below 13. But this extends to most people later on, even those who are older than him, as he's used to feel like he needs to help and protect others, this feeling being reinforced after not being able to protect his family the night they were attacked. He's doing that because of habit and out of gentleness, compassion, and good heart. Lyney, I feel, doesn't do that by kindness. He has a rather selfish and childish view of it. From what I'm getting, he basically thinks that being the oldest means he is the biggest, the leader, someone everyone will follow, will stay with. It's a way for him to assure himself that his love and belonging needs are met in a rather twisted way, a way for him to make sure no one leaves. If audiences were simply drawn to the spectacle of magic, then who was to say that they wouldn't abandon Lyney's stage as soon as they caught wind of a more enthralling show in town? 2. Cautiously self-reliant. He's self-reliant in the sense where he doesn't trust many people, even if he wants to. He keeps many things to himself, as said multiple times by Arlecchino, won't share his burden, and will rarely ask for help. Number 3. Often described as glib, manipulative, and disingenuous in their interactions with others as they move through childhood. Though he does not have much bad intentions, he does manipulate others by lying or hiding things from them, even by just reflex to protect himself. Number 4. Children who are victims of neglect can have a more difficult time forming and maintaining relationships, such as romantic or friendship, later in life due to the lack of attachment they had in their earlier stages of life. Having severe trust issues, Lyney does not seem to be that close to much people. Lynette and the Traveler are probably the two he's the closest to, Arlecchino and Freminet, and even he falls a little behind as Lyney is not that honest with him either, despite the fact the latter is aware of his social mask. Besides those 4, and eventually Paimon if you want, he doesn't seem to have many friends. And even then, he doesn't seem to have friends at all, as he immediately just treats us like his family. We can guess everyone else is just an acquaintance. It's said he tried to reach out many times for someone to know and love him for who he was, but that he was already too deep into his lies. As so the tower extended to the skies, until there would be no one to take his hand if he reached out, and even their visages blurred in his eyes. His dreams often took him back to the tower, where his resting place at the pinnacle of vintage would grow smaller and smaller, and with the fog of death they called Betrayal extending all around, there was nowhere for him to go. Even though he seems to try, it always ends up being fake, and not that close attachment he's looking for. And yet, despite this emotional neglect, Lyney doesn't seem to have ever rebelled against the noble. He explains us that he didn't get at the time that something was wrong until the very end.
It took a while for me to realize just how dark his heart really was.
He was simply going with the flow, doing what the noble asked him to do, go to the banquets he asked him to go to, did tricks if he asked him to.
But in truth, there was already a lot more to the story by then. After being taken in by an aristocrat for our magic talent, then betrayed soon after, this was no longer about me doing what I loved.
Lyney tells us that he had lost his pleasure for magic at some point in time. The flame was probably gone here, or at least starting to extinguish at this moment. He was simply following orders without any rebellion, because of his need for praise. How can I be good? Did I do good? This lack of attention and praise from actual parental figures caused the basis of his trauma, and it's starting to grow bigger and bigger. He was looking for praise in whoever would give him before, and today he would do anything to get that praise. Even if it drained him and did not give him any kind of satisfaction, well, he turned rather submissive and dependent. The average Frenchman height, to my knowledge, is about 178 centimeters, which can be close to average model height for tall main characters in Genshin. Based on that, and my estimations of Lyney and Lynette's heights compared to Caesar's, their heights would be around 127 centimeters, which match with that of 8-year-old kids. It made them currently around 18 in the game with a 10-year time skip. The separation from his sister took a big toll on Lyney. It developed a certain extreme dependency on her later on. For the first time, he rebelled against their guardians, as he had the verbal confirmation that he did not care about them and went to go fight his sister. Yet he trusted the noble at the beginning, which makes for a betrayal. Considering the noble is the first person he clearly remembers to have ever cared for them both, even if it was just in the domain of food, hygiene, and shelter, following his time alone in the streets, he was probably an individual he trusted too much at the beginning due to his innocence. It shattered his trust, which led to big trust issues to start creating. Betrayal by a parent can cause children to have difficulty in trusting others, which can impact their ability to form healthy relationships throughout their life. Children who experience parental betrayal may develop a negative self-image and struggle with feelings of worthlessness.
Father, the knave, might have seen something in me, and so she made me an offer. The House of the Hearth welcomes you, for your interests align with ours. Here, none will ever betray you. Indeed, Betrayal shall never be permitted here. I was hesitant to trust her. I mean, I had just been betrayed by nobles.
When he arrives on the scene and that Arlecchino proposes him and his sister to join her orphanage, he hesitates. There's already the first signs of mistrust and wariness starting to develop, despite him eventually accepting to join anyway. Arlecchino made it clear she had conditions, that he and his sister should stay loyal to the House of the Hearth, and they shall be loyal to him and Lynette in return.
Father gave us a family, raised us, and told each of us what we should work towards. In turn, what I can do is very simple. Remain loyal and protect our home.
It's an exchange, if you will. But she will also keep on telling them what to do and where to go. For example, she was the one telling them they should follow on the route of being magicians and meet Caesar. They would have intensive training and missions as members of the Fatui. They would obey her words and do or not things if she asked them to do or not. And that Lyney will accept without rebellion once again. The fact he accepted to join was probably out of desperation to find a place to stay, and the promise of someone being loyal to him seemed too tempting to refuse. And so, just like that, he agrees and do everything she will ask him to, simply because she does. Why? Because of his trauma. His lack of emotional support for as long as he can remember, the emotional neglect he suffered from for at least months, and the fact he's still in the stage of development where he wonders what he can do to be good to others, which will always stick with him since that's the stage of development or age where his trauma started. And for that, he becomes a people pleaser. Someone who cares a lot about whether other people like them and always wants others to approve of their actions. And to become that perfect people pleaser, mixing this need for praise and acceptance as well as his trust issues, he starts to lie. Even involuntarily at first, like a reflex, words escaped his lips even before he even thought about what to say.
What amazed me was how the lie escaped my lips even as I was hesitating over whether to tell him the truth.
In front of Caesar, he will play the role of a kid who just wants to learn magic out of pure passion. Passion which had dissipated in his heart quite a while ago, simply because he did not want to bother him. In front of arlecchino, he will be that little Fatui agent, ready to do whatever she wanted him to do, as long as it meant he could stay safe in the orphanage, as long as she would be happy with him. In front of his bullies at the orphanage, he would be as submissive and obedient as they wished. Bullying also has an impact on self-esteem and worth, so considering his lack of that same thing since the beginning, it probably only made things worse. He would think of himself as pitiful, boring, ridiculous, and worthy of trust, which are all things he tells us right at our face, both in the art conquest and in his voice lines. This low self-esteem and worth can also be seen at times where he's ready to risk his life to protect that of his sisters, like in Act 4 of Fontaine's art conquest, and when Freminet and Lynette were in danger. And Lyney told riotously he's willing to sacrifice himself if that meant Lynette and Freminet would be fine.
If you want, let them go.
Or like that time he fell unconscious and almost died during a mission with Lynette just to protect her. Or when he asked Arlecchino to give him a delusion without a care if it impacted his own lifespan, if it meant he could be by his sister's side more and assure her safety. On lower scales, like that one time in the first act of Fontaine's art conquest, where he followed that thief and twisted in his ankle in the process, yet not caring at all as long as the victim got their stuff back. It's also said and showed that despite his cool and laid-back demeanor, Lyney is pretty frightened when on stage. Before a show, and even during the show, Lynette and him both explain to us how tense he actually is, but doesn't want to show it. And him how scared he was during that one magic trick he did in honor to his master. He may suffer from stage fright, a nervousness before or during an appearance before an audience, even though he hides it pretty well most of the time. He's also very quick to take the blame, and to tell people not to worry about him, whether that goes from a twisted ankle to a literal shooting drug onto his neck when he revives his strongest trauma. This line the noble said to him about how unimportant who his assistant was also impacted him more in this lack of self-esteem. Indeed, Lynette has enough talent to be on her own, and she had been asked multiple times to assist other magicians or go on solo. And even then, even though it was this very same thing that frightened him so much, to lose and get distance from his sister, he still thought, why not? He had doubts about being worthy of her assistance, from his own twist sister who had always been with him and for him. He considered the fact she could eventually be better with another person, even as a kid when they were in the streets, wanting her to be in a nice cozy house while he would stay a street rat. And that it would be a great opportunity, completely ignoring his own feelings and downgrading his own capabilities as a magician. Additionally, to Josie's mask, he doesn't even need words. He just supposes, observes, theorizes, and deduces which would be best fit with who. He often praises Lynette's good side as she stays behind and economizes her energy to focus on observing, while completely dismissing his own abilities in that regard. He became able to understand his sister's emotions quite well thanks to her body language.
Cats can use their ears to express their feelings. If they flatten them backwards, it indicates fear or caution. And if their ears are perked up and occasionally face forward, that usually means they're happy. Constant swiveling indicates that they are vigilantly assessing their surroundings. How do I know this? Experience and observation.
As well as a complete stranger in his story quest.
First, you need to relax. Because I can see that you're clenching your fist in your mind, as if to say, no, I mustn't let him guess it.
Aww.
And now you're getting a little flustered. You're trying to find a way to empty your mind, to think of nothing at all. But the more you try to hide a secret, the easier it'll come out. You snuck out from home today, didn't you? You told your family a little lie so you could come out and play. Now, that's not a good habit.
You can tell? Oh boy, you really can read my mind.
That was nothing more than a little trickery. I made an educated guess based on his micro-expressions. Wait, shh. Have you noticed that person over there? The young girl.
Huh? What's wrong with her? Paimon didn't notice anything.
She's obviously a thief. Magicians and thieves practice similar methods. We divert attention, and a distracted audience is one that won't discover what you're really doing.
He also notices the same thing as her about Neuvillette, is able to deduce how Caesar's magic trick was done in just a glance, and he does that while speaking and not staying in the background like Lynette does, which is quite remarkable. And yet each time he always passes it as nothing. He just contents himself with adapting perfectly to the different situations and says anyone could do it, or even doubt himself and is only sure of a certain information only if Lynette also noticed it and confirms that his own deductions were right.
Monsieur Neuvillette rarely appears in public, almost as if he's intentionally trying to put some distance between himself and the people. At first, I thought it might be just me, but my ever-observant sister noticed it too, so I suppose that must really be the case.
Going back to his lies, the one lie he didn't talk much about was his current act, that of the charismatic and flamboyant magician, that he, Lynette, and Freminet openly tell us is fake, and is not how the real him is at all.
I have always been together with Lyney, and we can tell what the other is thinking without speaking. Thus, he tends to be more quiet than normal when we are alone. Lyney is normally quite confident and does everything with incredible ease. Or at least, that's how he wants everyone else to see him. So, when he runs into difficulties, he always wants to solve everything perfectly on his own.
Actually, the real me is nowhere near as outgoing or chatty as I appear. More often than not, I only work my verbal magic as a means of getting closer to people. Sometimes I think people would feel sorry for the real me. Do you? Or do you find my little games absurd?
Although he's seen as sociable, friendly, confident, speaking loud and clear almost in a very theatrical way, at least that's what I get from Damon Mill's interpretation of the character at these moments, versus when he's actually true to himself and to us, this mask that he wears is the one he wears currently the most, and has exactly the same purpose as all the others. To please. Please his audience, who would want a boring lad stuttering on stage and speaking so softly that not even those who sit in the first range of seats could hear. Whoever in the streets would pay attention to a discreet and quiet individual. He wouldn't think of him as annoying if he rebelled and stood proud of someone when that person treated him in a way that he disliked. Who would ever want to be friends, to take seriously someone who's just a bunch of traumas and insecurities all put together, and who on top of that is a member of the Fatui, an organization who is recognized as antagonistic. That's why he hides his from the Fatui at first. Lyney desperately tries to have friends, to have actual real connections, but he just can't bring himself to be completely honest, as he feels the real him is not worthy of it, that he would only be mocked and pitied. He's also now in the following stage of development. Ages 13 to 21, identity versus confusion, fidelity. Who am I, and where am I going? Having played too many parts, even Lyney would sometimes find himself questioning who he really was. It is mentioned that at some point, Lyney lost this sense of self. Amongst all this plethora of masks and lies that he wears to make people love him and stay, he doesn't know which one to wear or to remove to love and recognize himself. Which is why it's so hard for him to actually establish real connections with people, or many of it at least, since he himself has trouble discerning the truth and the lies. He himself thinks he is untrustworthy. And each time he reaches out his hand, he's already too high in his tower of lies for anyone to reach it, except Lynette to prevent him from falling. The first outburst of truth he probably did in years to someone he barely met was with the Traveler, after he broke their trust. He inflicted them the same pain he went through as a child, and genuinely didn't want them to go through the same route, desperately wanted them to stay. Given that popularity, Lyney probably heard of the Traveler already. He knows the image published of them in the newspapers is usually positive, and seemed like a good person. The fact that they decided to continue and defend him on that false accusation just proved to him how objective they were with him, and how they wouldn't let him down if he didn't mess up. Which is why he's so quick, after the Traveler gets aware of his identity, to tell them everything, all his past and even the darkest details, because he feels like they would be pleased if they knew, that they would understand, that they would empathize with him and his sister, and that they would stay. This desire to make people stay is still there, and it's stronger than ever with them, as it's heavily implied he has a crush on them, and probably is the first crush he ever experienced. And as the saying goes, love makes you blind. Even after that, in his story quest, right after the events of this first and second act of Fontaine, the very first thing he does while greeting them again is a magic trick by giving them a lumidus, symbolizing parting and a wish for reconciliation. Did I do good? How can I regain your trust again? How can I be good enough for you to accept and appreciate me? Lyney is lonely, an extremely lonely individual who just wishes to have real bonds and connections, and yet is cursed and prevented from doing so because of past experiences and how his brain reacts to them, which is why whenever there is the smallest, tiniest bits of honesty and truth in a relationship that he manages to get, for example with his sister, with freminet though a lot less, and quite importantly the Traveler, he will go all his way to make them stay. He will want to control the environment, to trap them to stay around him, if you will, although this sounds a little bit too evil for him. Which is why at the end of the quest, and later on in Acts 3 and 4 of Fontaine's Archon quest, he keeps on opening up more and more to the Traveler, as he knows this is what they want. The honest and real him he usually hides is what and who they want to see. Only then will they be able to trust him more, which eventually leads him to give them a rainbow rose, symbolizing passion and romantic encounters. A much more discreet and adapted way for the timid and quiet Lyney than to confess with words, and in so little time to process his feelings. His and Lynette's hair are complementary. Both have braids on opposite sides of their head, a bang on opposite sides, a strand of hair of opposite color, and different lengths. Yet there is a noticeable difference other than the positions, which is the fact his bangs are quite long compared to his sister's, covering a whole quarter of his face. In fiction, it can have multiple meanings, who can all be traced back to Lyney, to show deception or concealment, to show vulnerability or introversion by acting as a fragile shield or barrier. For example, the character is a social loner, to show that the character is shy and demure. Given his low self-esteem, stage fright, and introversion, it makes sense that he's trying to hide, both with his words, as he's constantly lying, but also physically. The fact his bangs are on the side of the tear-shaped mark on his cheek, yet is purposefully not covered, may also have a meaning. It's supposed to be a makeup mark he has for shows, or a tattoo for some people. So perhaps the very fact that people know it's fake may dissuade them to look further for it, to not look too much in his past and his vulnerability. And yet it is exposed, both a lie and a truth. There are many cat-like symbols in his clothes, more than Lynette actually, and even in his attacks. Although I believe he's still got the genes his sister has, and that they just manifest in different forms, like his eyes, his love for sleep and fish, he's still lacking what his sister has. This lack of equally as obvious noticeable cat features in him may have brought some guilt too. As he's so obsessed with the thought of protecting his sister, of being her older brother and everyone's leader, the fact he didn't have cat ears or tail like her was the very reason why Lynette started to be bullied. From what we saw of his younger designs, he didn't wear those cat symbols before a certain time in the House of the Hearth. He may have started to work at like accessories to match with Lynette and give her support in his own way regarding the bullying she got from her cat features, and encourage her not to hide them. It can also be seen as another form of protection and dependence on his sister. He's much more childish in his actions and demeanor than her in a lot of aspects. To conclude, here's a brief summary of all that I previously analyzed. Broke down and analyzed like that, I feel like he's actually quite a fascinating character. His development follows a logic train of roots that can be traced back with psychology and analysis. It kind of surprised me when I saw people still thinking his loud and cocky personality was the real him, because to me, and I hope to you too now, well, he's really not. He's a nice reflection of Furina's character. Both are lying and hiding their real selves for a very, very long period of time. The difference being Furina is forced to by someone else to please others out of love and wish to save her country, and Lyney is forced to lie because of his trauma, himself, to please others out of fear of being hurt. I would honestly love for them to interact once more. I feel like with a little preparation beforehand, Furina would agree to chat with him and get to know him a bit better. The problem is that I'm not sure Lyney would feel strong enough to really let his mask down with her as much as he does with the Traveler, which is already something a little difficult for him to do, even though he wants and tries to. So yeah, I really love his writing. I'm pretty sure this breakdown I just did can be done and has been done with other characters, such as the Wanderer, which is why even though Lyney is no god or divine creation, except if you count the Oceanid thing, but that's not a personal thing, because it'd be for all the Fontainians, he ain't unique if you were an Oceanid and Fontaine, I appreciate him quite as much as really well-written characters in this game. Also, I love cats, plus nostalgia. Also, you could have given him cat ears and a tail, hoyoverse. You lovely coverts, I love you, but why? You could have made him a real cat boy, why? So yeah, here is my breakdown of Lyney's character. I hope you enjoyed listening and that it perhaps may have given you more info about his character that you didn't know yet or didn't catch on at first, or that you just enjoyed listening to me and listened to such a breakdown even if you figured out everything. So on that note, I'll leave you there. I think this video will upload maybe in January, but still, Happy New Year! Bye!